Thanks, John. Yeah, I think it's really the two things that we're kicking off here with today, I think are important for the following. One, because there's never-ending confusion between what's an instance of the database versus what's the database, which John has hopefully just clarified for you. And the other is the data dictionary. And I put this chapter as the kickoff of the DBA book because I feel the data dictionary is absolutely critical and important to any database administrator, because so many of the questions that you need to answer during the course of your day, like how many tables do I have, where are these tables, what segments do they belong to, and so on and so forth, and how big are they, are answered by looking at the data dictionary. So it's really important to have a good working knowledge of the data dictionary, and that's what I'm kicking off with here. So obviously we're going to answer the question, what is a data dictionary, and understand the types of tables and views that are available to us, and gain some experience using these things. So we must know how to query the data dictionary, and here's a very, very simple query of the data dictionary. A couple of points I'd like to make. The keywords aren't in uppercase in some examples in this book, probably most. That's not necessary. The object names, or the column names in this case, the table names in this case, or view name in this case, column names here are in lowercase, but that is also unnecessary. Strings, literals as they're sometimes called, inside quotes, do need to be case sensitive. And almost everything stored in the data dictionary is in uppercase. There are definitely exceptions to that, but most of the time you'll be using uppercase. So here's a very simple query from a view called DBA tables. And DBA tables shows us all of the tables, in this case, that are contained within this table space. Now, we'll talk in detail later on in the class, what are table spaces, why are they useful, how do we manage table spaces, create them, delete them, etc., move them, export them, and so on and so forth. But for now, a table space is a container for objects. And right now, I'm looking for what tables, who owns them, and the names of the tables that are in the table space called users. You've probably seen users. It's one of the default table spaces that comes with Oracle when it's installed. And you can see we start to get a list of objects here. So the data dictionary is metadata, and metadata means that it's data about the database itself. So the database stores information inside the database about itself, and that data is changed as time goes by. So we create new objects or remove objects from the database. The data dictionary is actually a series of base tables owned by SYS, and SYS, is the fundamental user, the starting user of the system, is the king of the hill, if you will. And there are a bunch of tables like sys.tab$ that the views that the data dictionary we typically use are based on. So if you did a describe on sys.tab$, you might see that these column names are not very friendly. Don't really describe to you what they're doing, and you know, what they contain, and they're not very user friendly. So if you do a describe on DBA tables, it's a lot more intuitive. You have a column called owner, table name, table space name, a lot more user friendly and intuitive. But they are really based on these underlying views, and we do use these sometimes as DBAs. There is more than 1,200 data dictionary views in 11G, and some you'll use probably every day, and some not so often. They're categorized into static views, for example, DBA tables or user tables. Dynamic views that change over the life of the instance, like $v parameter, or some of them change over the life of the instance. Global dynamic views, like GV parameter. And these are for rack environments. And then there are some undocumented, some people call them hidden views. Typically start with an $X. And we'll use these a couple times during this class. And you should always have the Oracle documentation within fair reach, Oracle 11G database reference. So you can find all of these views, as well as the database reference also has your initialization parameters. So I'll go over here and I'll just Google the 11G release 2 docs and see if we get the good hit here. And I typically like to leave the master book list up at my reach here. If I go to the reference, and so this is a great book to be very familiar with. Usually hide the navigation. If I'm logged in, it knows my choices already, but I'm not logged in on this browser. And so if I were interested in a particular view like DBA tables, just come down here and click on it and see everything there is to know about DBA tables. Actually, it tells me there's a better view to look at, which is equivalent, and that is all tables. So let me pass to you guys. Do you know the difference between DBA tables and all underscore tables?
I've often wondered that myself.
Yeah, Kathy?
Not sure.
Okay, let's turn the page, go to static views, and the answer will be right here for you. So these static views, like DBA tables, user tables, and all tables, in general contain data about objects or privileges or users, that type of thing. And they, in general, change with DDL operations. So as somebody executes a create table, a new row appears in all underscore tables or DBA underscore tables. But let's get clear about what the difference is between user, all, and DBA. User is a view that hides everything except the stuff that you own. So who's ever currently logged in, that's all you're going to see. So if I show user here, let me bring that up into the focus a little bit better. If I show user here, I'm logged in as system, and I select the Monday morning typer. There's 161 objects or rows in user tables for system, but if I connect as a different user and I execute that same query, there is 0 rows in user tables. And now that I've created a table, we can see that there is now a row in user tables. So that's my stuff. All is everything that the user is privileged to have access to. So you can see that for whatever reason, user Dave has access to 2,842 tables. One of them is obviously the one I just created. But there's about 2,800 tables that I actually have access to. And that's because earlier I created Dave. It's off the screen now, but I created Dave, the user Dave, and granted permission of DBA to Dave, the role DBA actually, which contains select any table privilege. what is it, John? Privileges, sysprivs?
Session roles. Session underscore roles.
Is there session privs? Yeah. So all these roles, that DBA was the one I granted to Dave, and DBA had a bunch of other stuff with it. And oh, I did that again. Is there session privs? Yeah, session privs. So there's a lot of stuff in there, but I should have done an order by. So there's a lot of, the reason that was 2,800 tables was because user Dave has select any table privilege and other objects that fall into that category. So all contains information about all of the objects and privileges and objects that I am privileged to use. Finally, there's DBA underscore, and DBA underscore contains a list of all of the objects that are in the database. For example, DBA tables would contain all of the tables that are in the database. But you, of course, have to be privileged to use the DBA level static views.
What's the difference between a catalog and a table space, if that's not like getting way ahead of ourselves?
Well, a catalog is a collection of views which, to some degree, we're querying, we're exploring now. DBA tables is one of those views, right? So it's a collection of these views and tables. A table.
So it's almost like a view space, or?
Don't know. I'm not familiar with that term, view space.
Oh, I was just was extrapolating from tables live in table spaces to views live in view spaces, but I don't know if that, which were called catalogs. I'm not sure if that's an accurate idea, though.
Yeah. Is it an analogy you're bringing forth from the MySQL environment?
No, actually, it's not. Okay. I just saw the select catalog role and was trying to map that in my head with this, select any tables and table spaces and things like that.
So table spaces are a repository for physical objects.
Okay.
So when you have an object like a table that you're putting data into, or an index that contains pointers to data, these are physical disk-based objects. And a table space is a repository for physical disk-based objects.
Okay.
And it lets you actually logically group those physical objects. So you can put a bunch of tables into a single table space, and maybe you can take that table space offline and do maintenance to it and bring it back online all together. So all of the tables and perhaps indexes that are in that table space will be done together.
Okay.
We'll revisit that concept later in this course, by the way. A catalog, there's only one catalog in a database, and it's a series of views that belong to, they're owned by user sys, and they're views that describe the database itself. There's only one. So one catalog. So I don't want to get too hung up on that problem why I can't get Scott privileges. But the point I want to make is that Scott doesn't have privilege to the DBA because he's not a DBA. Well, certainly I could fix it all by granting Scott DBA privilege, and that would be the end of it. But I'd rather figure out my problem before I do that. So I'll revisit that later and give you the solution. The main thing is that you have the grasp of the different levels of static views inside the catalog, user, all, and DBA, and what they will show you. Any questions on the different types, user role and DBA static views?
I'll just add to mention that if any of you ever do the exams, this is a classic question you get in the exams. You know, which view will show you all the tables? And of course you're meant to say all tables. Whereas the answer, of course, is DBA tables. Back to you, Dave.
Thanks, John. So I just try to put forth here for the DBA, what are some of the common DBA views that you are going to use? We tend to not use the word static all the time. We just say common DBA views, you know, but they're technically static because they only change when you do things like create or drop or alter or whatever. And these are just some common ones. You'll be looking a lot at tables, so you'll want to be querying DBA tables. You'll want to know what columns are in Mike's table. And so you would go to DBA tab columns. And you'll become familiar with these different tables as time goes by. Constraints are a big part. We'll talk more about constraints in this class. Constraints are a very important part of Oracle and important for reasons like performance tuning, application tuning. So these two views are critical, DBA constraints and DBA cons columns. DBA indexes, again, perhaps for tuning. DBA table spaces. Kathy just asked, you know, what is the difference between a table space and catalog? Table space is a repository of objects that contain data. So DBA table spaces is a very important object for us DBAs because we're always managing table spaces. Objects like tables contain are you know, underlying the DBA underlying a table. Of course, is a file. It all comes down to files on disk, right, when you're talking about the database. And so DBA data files. DBA objects, when you're talking about all of the different types of objects that can be in a database. How about synonyms and sequences and tables? All of these things would be listed in DBA objects. So as we go through the course, and it's not our job now to remember each one of these DBA views. It's not our job now to remember all of the columns, certainly, in these DBA views, but what it is our job is to be aware of them and know that when you've got a question in your mind about indexes, there's probably a view out there that will help you answer that question. That is the critical takeaway. We'll be using these views as we go through the class. Here's a couple of simple examples. Show all the users that have been created in my database. Well, here's a simple query. Select username and account status from DBA users and perhaps sort for readability. Okay. And the order by one says order by the first column. Could have said order by username. Order by one is equivalent to saying order by username. We get a list of our users. We'll talk more about the different account statuses later. Again, that's not our major objective here. We'll be dealing more about account statuses and so forth when we talk about Oracle security. But these accounts are open, meaning they can be logged into. HR, the password has expired and the account is locked. We'll talk more about that, how to free that up later. You saw me do a quick example of it before. I want to know what system privileges have been granted to a particular user. So I would use DBA sysprivs. Again, typical question that you might have to ask yourself in the course of a day of being a DBA. And grant. So here we'll look at DBA sysprivs. This one isn't so convenient and intuitive. Sometimes I go to the reference, you know, and I say, well, show me all the dictionary tables that have to do with privileges. But you have to remember that it's spelled privs, abbreviated as privs in the reference. Okay. So you can see that user Dave, in this case, has been granted create table privilege. You can also see that this user Dave is not an administrator of the create table privilege. In other words, user Dave cannot pass create table privilege on to someone else. This said yes, user Dave would be able to grant that privilege to someone else. These are a couple of views that I find that float under the radar screen of a lot of shops, and they're useful. DBA high watermark statistics tells me how many times I've used particular features or particular things inside the database. Overall, it records the use of the database. For example, how many user tables currently are there in the database, or what was the most user tables ever created, and what is the current value, number of the user tables. Size of the largest segment. See, I'm at my high watermarks right now. Do I have any partition tables? No. Do I have any partition indexes? Has any user created an index? Yes. How many concurrent sessions have I ever had? So it shows you the use of your database. It can be very handy, especially when planning to move to a new platform or a new server. The next one shows me what features, particularly advanced features, have been used. Show me the features like advanced replication, advanced security. Most of these features, in fact all the ones listed here, require Enterprise Edition, in some cases options, additional cost options within Enterprise Edition. Now, automatic segment space management is actually an exception to that. But most of these do require Enterprise Edition and an option, like advanced security. I've limited it where row num is equal to 5, and that was just for the display purposes, so I could show you just a few of them. Okay, but this is a really good thing to know about. Am I or is someone in my shop using a feature that I should know about? If you buy our Enterprise Edition, by the way, the features and options are there, ready to be used. And it's a little of a parlor game, in my opinion, that Oracle Sales uses, because they want you to use them, and then they want you to buy them. So you might not even know that one of your programmers or one of your DBAs is using a particular feature. And if you want to do some compliance auditing, you might come out here and see if somebody's been using this. So this is a good view to know about. Now, moving on, dynamic performance views. Dynamic performance views typically change during the life of the instance. Not always, but they can. $$ parameter shows you the parameters that are in play, the initialization parameters that are being used. Let's use Dave. $$ parameter shows you the name of the parameter and what the type and the value. So name and value.
When I do a show param, this is what I see?
Correct. Right. Let's do that. Okay. Now, the difference between show parameter and this is, well, they had a % sign for one. They had a % sign on both sides. They had the wildcard on both sides of the string. So where I just got recovery parallelism, which also showed up in the show parameter. But because they have a % sign in front and at the trail of the string, they got everything with Rico in the string. So these will change, like $$ session changes based on who's currently logged on. $$ database, let's actually take a quick look at that. by the end of this course, you'll understand many of the fields in this $V view or dynamic performance view, because you're going to be talking about control files. You're going to be talking about reset logs. Okay. For now, what's the name of my database? And really should also have DBID in your radar scope. And $instance, John described the difference between database instance. That's what I wanted. So class is the name of my database. Class is also the name of my instance. You might notice the case difference, but they're one and the same, and that's very common. However, in rack environments, remember that John said that there are multiple instances that can access the one database. So you might have different instance names, or you would have different instance names, maybe class 1, 2, and 3, and 4 for a 4-node rack accessing one database. The DBID is a unique number that identifies this database and can be very useful in certain recovery operations as well as other things. But again, the columns in $$ database and $$ instance will become more clear to you as you go through these lessons in this class.
Dave, I may be jumping ahead here, but I'm a little confused about the DBID.
Mm-hmm.
It's called a database ID, but is it really an instance ID?
No, it's a unique identifier for the files that make up the collection of database files. Let's take a look at that.
I do a lot of cloning of our production database for testing purposes, and they all have the same database IDs. And I'm wondering if I should try to change that database ID when I create a clone.
I'd like John's opinion on this, but there is a utility to change the database ID. And how are you doing the clones?
Usually just copying over the database files and
Right. So
putting them into another instance.
Yeah. So think about the process that you're using. You're just probably shutting the database down and doing an operating system level copy of the database files.
Yeah, either that or RMAN.
Right.
To do a recovery.
Okay. So when you do that, you copy over the files. Nothing's being changed in the files, and so thus it ends up with the same database ID.
Correct.
In my opinion, that's not typically a problem unless you wanted to use that database, that new clone, for something important, significant, like a production database. Because then you would want a different database ID. You don't want two production databases with the same database ID, in my opinion. I mean, it's a unique identifier that is used in certain operations. So
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't an instance ID.
No, it's in the control file for your database. It's stored in there, so it's actually part of the database files. Okay, we went through $$ parameter. This is the same as doing a show parameter. In this particular example, we're looking for the location of the alert log. One of the things that the database administrator, of course, becomes familiar with is the alert log. Looking in location background dump dest will show you the location of your alert log. Now, our alert logs are over here on the server. So this is a PuTTY session, and I did a show parameter background. So there's the alert log, and we'll want to become real familiar with this because this is where significant activity on the database is recorded and significant errors are recorded. You never want to change this alert log. So, let's see if I have the, here's the end of my alert log, and we can just see that we have some log switches going on the January 21 here, long time ago. So not a lot of activity. Looks like any significant activity was first at 2 a.m. and then at 5 a.m. this morning. Not a lot going on here. Oops. Looks like we got a connection error last Friday to this database. Probably find a few of those in there. Okay, so the alert log is something you'll be exploring in this class. That's its location. Okay. Just some miscellaneous views. Session privs I find handy is to find out what session privileges I currently have active. Did this one before. If you spell it right, it will work. So they're all the session privs. Now some of those session privs, or perhaps most of those session privs in this particular case, come from a role. We'll talk more about roles later in the class. A role is a collection of privileges, but we'll talk more about that later. Okay. Dictionary is the name and descriptions of all of the data dictionary views. In other words, the catalog. So there is something called the dictionary, can actually be abbreviated. So it's got all of the views and tables that make up the dictionary. Okay, so that's going to go in for quite a while, so I'm going to cancel that. What table privileges do you have? Are listed in table privileges. So these are just some miscellaneous, and these views were set up for convenience for us, for traversing the catalog and learning and finding our way through the catalog. Okay. That's an example of querying the dictionary view. Show me all of the dictionary views that start with DBA tab, something to do with tabs or tables. You can see the results here. Okay. There's a script that I put out that I have for you guys called dict, which will show you all the dictionary. You pass it in a parameter, and it will limit the output to only those that match the string you pass it. So I want to find out everything that has to do with privileges in this particular example. Okay. Did I send you over the scripts? Did you send over the scripts? Kathy, Scott, you getting scripts yet?
The scripts haven't been distributed yet.
Okay, we'll get those over to you today. Okay. We had seen in the lesson that there was a view called DBA users. Now, technically, this is a static dictionary view, but we just tend to call them dictionary views. DBA users. So static meaning that a new row would appear in here if a new user was created, or it would reduce if a user was dropped. The first thing I like to do is describe it. And there's going to be some columns in here we definitely don't understand yet because we haven't done the lesson on creating and managing users, and we haven't done the lesson on security. So there's definitely going to be some stuff in here that we don't understand. But, some of it you can weed through, and if you had a question, of course, you could always either ask John or I, or you could always come over to your reference material that's out on the web. You should definitely have that bookmarked. So the question is display the username and account status. And you can see that in my case, most of the accounts were actually expired and locked, which means that someone could not log into them. The password had expired and the account was locked. Some of them were open. I had created a user called Dave and so forth. But John will talk more about creating and managing users and security later on in the course, give you a lot more insight into this and how to manage these. But you're getting your feet on the ground about how to find information. Next question is to display the name and status of all the table spaces on your database. Once again, I like to start with a describe command. Show me the columns that make up the DBA table spaces dictionary view. And I find that there's a table space name and there's a status. Status is typically going to be, as you can see, online. And could be offline for maintenance operations. So there's a few different statuses that you could find. Now this actually be probably a really good one to go to the dictionary view and say, there is no corresponding all table spaces because it's a DBA type item. Go to DBA table spaces. And you can see the status can be one of three things. Online, offline, perhaps for maintenance operations, or read-only for read-only table spaces that contain tables that you don't want people to be able to update. Okay. The next one said for each data file on your database. I briefly mentioned DBA data files to you during the lecture. So you might have been aware that there was a dictionary view out there for every data file that held table or index data for your database. And DBA data files can be very handy. So it's got the file name, the table space that it belongs to. Remember, a table space is a collection of objects that contain data. It's got the number of bytes used, the number of blocks used by that table space. So I happen to be familiar with a little bit of SQL Plus reporting, so I actually added a compute sum of bytes, this column, sum the bytes column on the report at the end of the report. I put a break on the report. So that wasn't necessarily, but I can see that my total database size, excluding logs and control files and certain things, the total database size was about 2 gig. Pretty quick and easy way to find that out. Okay. And then the last few I had demonstrated to you in lecture. So. But I like the describe command when I'm trying to navigate my way through the data dictionary or the catalog, if you will. I like the reference guide. These are very, very useful resources for helping me answer questions about my environment. So DBA data files being a good example of that.